Go right ahead, Louis.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I guess I'll introduce myself as well, since I'll be presenting. I'm Louis-Henri. I work as a PhD student, and I am part of Professor Brian Ford's lab. And my work has been on coercion-resistant remote e-voting systems. So we're going to present to you, basically what I've been working on for the past 2 years. And let me share my, I'm going to get the presentation started. And can everyone see the slides? Okay, perfect. So my work will be on, my work has been on Votegral. It's a coercion-resistant in-person voter registration scheme. So it's a work in progress under submission. So please don't disseminate. So let me start with the roadmap. So first, I'm going to start by a brief introduction of the talk. Then I'm going to discuss some background on remote e-voting systems and also their current challenges with coercion-resistant e-voting systems. Then present our solution Votegral, and finally conclude. So as an introduction, remote e-voting systems are susceptible to coercion. And the problem is that existing literature on coercion-resistant remote e-voting systems assume the voter has an untappable or incorruptible device during voter registration. And we present our solution, Votegral, that it basically enables voters to procure verifiable credentials while using an untrusted device at the registrar. So yeah, let's head into background and defining the problem clearly. So remote e-voting systems. So like mostly all e-voting systems, you have a phase, voter registration. And you have this also for POP, where you have to register with some party, to get a token or a credential in that regards. So in this regard, remote e-voting systems, you would have the voter introduce or present a credential to the registration official. And the registration official would provide the voter with some credential, so more or less a public key, private key pair. And then the voter at any stage later on, when an election pops up, then they'll be able to cast a ballot in this election using the credential that was given to them in a completely online setting. And naturally, their vote gets put into a tally, and then their vote, it gets counted in the final tally, and you get the results. And of course, the tally is end-to-end verifiable and also anonymous. And of course, the benefits of remote e-voting systems is you only need to do the voter registration process once, and then you can do elections, many elections, and these credentials, depending on policy, they could last like 5, 10 years, whichever, kind of like a passport. So, okay, so what is coercion? So let's informally discuss this. We have, for example, three examples I'd like to discuss. So there's what most people would expect coercion to be, which is forcing or compelling someone to do something that they wouldn't do under their own free will. And you also have the case with vote buying or political favors. And this was quite prevalent during the time of Boss Tweed in New York City in the late 1800s. And we also have smart contracts. And this one's really interesting, where you are able to have decentralized autonomous organizations, and they could do large-scale anonymous vote buying in that respect. So you wouldn't have to interact with any centralized party to do a large-scale vote buying. And what coercion doesn't entail, unfortunately, coercion does not include manipulation. And a prime example of this is Cambridge Analytica, where unfortunately the individual casts a vote that they believe is under their own free will, but of course they were, well, in a sense, manipulated to cast a different type of vote. Okay, so let's see. So this is again the snapshot from before, and let's see what happens when we introduced a coercer. So when we introduce the coercer adversary, the coercer will state, you know, I want you to cast a vote for X, and the voter in this regard would have no choice but to cast X with their credential that they've received from the registrar. And some other real-world coercion attacks include the simulation attack, where instead of the coercer demanding that the voter cast a certain vote, the coercer instead demands that the voter hands over their credential that the registrar gave to the voter. So then the coercer can just act as the voter to begin with. And of course, the election authority would be none the wiser. Randomization attack is actually having the voter not vote for a particular candidate per se, but it's actually just vote and cast an invalid vote. So it's just kind of like a blank vote. So it's a way to make the voter abstain from voting, as well as forced abstention attack. There's some mechanism with the voting system that allows anyone to check on some public ledger whether someone cast a vote or not. So in this respect, the coercer will just basically check this ledger to see whether the targeted voter has cast a vote or not. So coercion resistance. So there's this seminal paper, and this is a term coined by Jules Catalano and Jacobson, and they've defined coercion resistance informally as it being infeasible for an adversary to determine whether a coerced voter complies with the adversary's demands. And their proposed solution in this regard is that the voter actually has two types of credentials. They have a real credential, and they also have a fake credential. So the real credentials is what we've seen before, but in this case, now we're introducing the notion of fake credentials. And the voter can have multiple fake credentials, up to even unlimited, virtually an unlimited number of fake credentials. So when the coercer forces the voter to cast a certain ballot, the voter will instead cast this ballot using their fake credential. And at a later time, when the voter is no longer under coercion or under the supervision of the coercer, the voter will cast a vote using their real credential. And existing literature then has to worry about the tally process, because you will need to figure out how to filter between fake credentials and real credentials and remove ballots that were cast using fake credentials in a verifiable and still in an anonymous manner as well. But what literature has been lacking, and what our work is about, is this part, the voter registration portion. Because the problem is existing literature make the assumption that the voter can procure their real and fake credentials using some untappable or incorruptible voter device during voter registration. And basically, this device means why untappable and incorruptible means that it can't be accessed by the coercer during this time period. So unfortunately, we don't believe this to be a reasonable assumption in practice because one simple reason is the coercer has the ability to interact with the voter during the voting phase. So it seems a bit awkward to say that, okay, the coercer can't interact with the voter during the voter registration phase, so the previous phase of voting. So how can the voter obtain, real and fake credentials without using such a trusted device? So this is where my work comes in with Votegral. So we work on a coercion-resistant in-person voter registration scheme. And the first main important point is voter privacy, right? We want to ensure that the voter can act under their free will. So basically prevent the coercer from supervising the voter during voter registration. And we rely on the fact that, okay, the voter has to come in person to a registrar's office and present and authenticate themselves, to determine their eligibility and whatnot. So we'll use this to have the voter proceed with an in-person booth access. So this is similar to in-person voting, where the voter would be given a booth where they could cast or, well, really fill out, depending if you're using paper or a machine, where they would, fill out and cast a ballot inside this booth. But in this case, they'll use the booth as a way to create their real and fake credentials within this private environment. And another requirement is that the voter is not allowed to bring any electronic devices in this booth. And certain, at least US jurisdictions do somewhat enforce this. But in this case, the reason why the voter wouldn't be able to bring their electronic devices in the booth is because then a coercer could just say, okay, we'll record your entire session while you're inside this booth, so I know which credential is real and which credential is fake. All right, so since now that we've achieved, voter privacy, let's look into credential integrity. So basically, how does the voter ensure that the kiosk, when it's providing a credential, whether it's a real credential or a fake credential? So we need some type of procedure that forces the kiosk to remain honest when issuing the voter their real credential. Because in our assumptions or in our threat model, we assume that both the registrar and the kiosk, whether they're working together or independently, can be malicious. And let's see how this, what an example of malicious could mean. So the kiosk, instead of giving the voter their real credential, they'll actually give the voter a fake credential. And as you would assume, real credentials and fake credentials are indistinguishable from each other. So the voter will be none the wiser. And now that this happens, the registrar could cast a vote using what would be the voter's real credential to the election authority. And then when the voter casts their vote with the supposed real credential, which is in this case a fake credential, then unfortunately only the vote cast by the registrar would be counted in the final tally. So this is keeping the voter from casting votes. So what are our threat model, what are our goals in achieving, in resolving this issue? Well, we want to avoid trusted hardware to fix this issue. If anything, trusted hardware should be somewhat complementary, but we shouldn't be relying on it. And kiosks are, well, untrusted, as we just talked about, except in a specific instance where voters are actively under coercion. And we'll discuss this more in future slides. So what literature has proposed in regards to credential integrity is to secret share the credential among multiple registration officials or registrars. In this regard, then, no one registrar would know the voter's credential, and if at least one registrar is honest, then the registrar wouldn't be able to reconstruct the credential and cast votes on behalf of the voter. However, if we're doing this in person in a booth, how this would be kind of impractical. Like, the voter would have to go into different booths because they'll have to interact with different kiosks. They're going to have to exchange information with multiple kiosks. So this is kind of starting to become a kind of a logistical nightmare in that regards. So how do we ensure credential integrity using a single kiosk and a single untrusted kiosk? So our solution is to use an interactive zero-knowledge proof. And in this respect, the kiosk will first, before anything, will first provide some information to the voter. The voter, in turns, will provide some challenge. So it's an offline challenge that the kiosk does not know about ahead of time. And then the kiosk will produce a response, which will contain the credential as well as finalizing the zero-knowledge proof. In this way, the kiosk cannot cheat its way out of giving a real credential to the voter. And the voter knows that it's a real credential, but because it's an interactive zero-knowledge proof and not a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof, it won't be able to prove this to anyone later. So anyone that's not seeing this interaction inside the booth cannot determine the validity of the zero-knowledge proof. So and you kind of see why here. With the fake credential process, instead, the voter will provide the challenge before anything else. And then the kiosk will forge an interactive, will forge a zero-knowledge proof. So this makes both not only the credentials totally indistinguishable from each other, because the proofs will be cryptographically valid, both in terms of the real credential and the fake credential, but not semantically, because the procedure to create the proof was different. So that's why these real and fake credentials will be indistinguishable outside the privacy of this booth. Now, let's move on to credential usability. So now we've been kind of thinking abstractly about, okay, well, the kiosk is supposed to give some information to the voter and the voter is supposed to give information back to the kiosk, but in what medium should this happen? Existing literature has proposed using smart cards generally, which is pretty portable, and it also allows panic pins where you could have a real credential on a smart card, and if someone is coercing you to vote in a particular manner, you could type a panic pin. So it's any pin that's not your real pin. It would sign with some fake credential instead. Unfortunately, the solution that we has several limitations. One, you're relying on trusted hardware. You have some financial costs, as well as some environmental waste or environmental costs. And you also have some supply chain logistics, surprisingly enough. We can discuss more about that after. Yeah. So what we propose instead is this medium of exchange should happen on paper. And it should happen just by having QR codes on paper. They're just as portable because it's a piece of paper, and it's inexpensive. Again, because it's paper. So anytime you go shopping, you have a receipt printer, and you can print anything you want on it. And on top of that, there is no extra hardware involved, right? The only hardware that would be involved is whichever device the voter wants to cast their vote in. So which we know requires some kind of device in itself. So instead of having a smart card and some other device, you just have a single device. And the voter would want to shred their paper, unfortunately. So this is it is a limitation. So it's kind of like what we consider toxic waste. But this is quite solvable, but I won't get into in the talk. Okay, so now let me present to you the end-to-end scheme. So from beginning to end, what this would actually look like to the voter. So basically, how do we put all of these pieces together between the privacy booth, we have an untrusted kiosk, the interactive zero-knowledge proof, the credentials, the QR codes, putting this all together. So let's step back and let's start with the check-in. So the voter will naturally present some identity document, and upon proving their eligibility, the registrar, registration official, will provide the voter with a check-in ticket. So it's basically just a single QR code printed on a piece of paper. And then, as we saw before, the voter will enter inside the privacy of a booth where a kiosk is located, and the voter has no electronic devices, just a check-in ticket that was given by the registration official. So, of course, the kiosk also needs to authenticate the voter, and this is what the check-in ticket is for. But in that respect, we also got a few additional items inside this booth that I haven't discussed, which is envelopes, a stack of envelopes, and a pen. So the stack of envelopes is something that's already in the booth, and it's already been printed, let's say. It's supplied by what we call a printing authority. So this printing authority's single job is to just produce envelopes with a single QR code on them that is basically what we were talking about, the zero knowledge proof challenge. So each of these QR codes are unique. And they contain, they're each random bit strings, basically. And we also have a pen, and we'll see what that's used for. So how the real credential creation process. So what would happen is, as soon as the voter presents the check-in ticket to the kiosk, the kiosk will print a single QR code and display this QR code to the voter. And the voter, once they're like, oh, okay, thank you for printing the QR code, will present any one of the envelopes from the stack of envelopes. And so we'll present this, basically the QR code of that envelope, to the kiosk. And then the kiosk will finalize the receipt. So this receipt now contains the zero knowledge proof commit and the zero knowledge proof response, as well as the voter's credential. And the next step for this is that the voter will take the receipt and will place the receipt into the envelope. So the envelope is actually hollow in respect. So you're able to put the receipt into the envelope, and the envelope has actually a little marking here where you could say, where the voter could write real in it as a way to distinguish from the process when they create their fake credential process. So let's see what this fake credential process entails. So yeah, the fake credential process, as we saw, would mean that the voter provides an envelope first. So the kiosk does not print anything unlike the previous step, but the voter will take a new envelope and will just present it to the kiosk and scan the QR code. And then the kiosk will print the entire receipt in one go and provide it to the voter. And then, as an example, the voter can sarcastically mark the envelope as very real or anything they like. And the voter will basically be able to use these markings to distinguish between, yeah, the real credential and fake credentials. And naturally, the fake credential process should happen, should be able to repeat as many times as the voter wishes, or as many times until there are no more envelopes in the stack of envelopes. So that could be quite a lot of envelopes. And the reason for this as well is the coercer, if you're as an attack vector, could say, well, if a voter is only allowed to have one real credential, which is a given, and the process is only one fake credential, then the voter, I will demand the voter to give me two credentials, so which would be one real and one fake. But in this place, in this procedure, since the voter is able to create as many fake credentials as they want, every time the coercer demands T credentials, the voter is able to create T+1 credentials. All right, and now we're outside the booth, so the checkout procedure. So during checkout, yeah, the voter leaves the booth and may hand any one of their credentials that they created. So this either could be their real credential or a fake credential, anyone, to the registration official. And the registration official will actually scan the middle QR code, so the QR code that's in yellow. And this QR code contains an encrypted real credential. It contains the encrypted real credential, and we'll publish this on some public ledger. So now, when the voter leaves the registrar, the voter will activate their credential by lifting the receipt by 1/3 of its length. So in this process, you're actually revealing the top and the bottom QR codes of the receipt. So all three QR codes. So, and as you can imagine, the top one, it would be the commit that was printed first. The middle is the actual zero knowledge proof challenge, and the bottom QR code is the zero knowledge proof response, as well as the credential. And the voter's device will be able to scan all three QR codes, ensure that all three QR codes are cryptographically valid, and load the credential onto the device, and warn the voter if anything were to have gone wrong during voter registration. And there are actually some different type of scenarios that we've thought about for credential activation. The common cases I just described last slide, where the voter uses their own device to cast votes. Yeah, to load their credential and cast votes on them. But in this case, the voter must have access to a device they trust, unfortunately, which is not always possible, depending on the type of coercer, for example, a domestic coercion scenario. So a different way would be, if the voter has no trusted device, let's ask a trusted family or friend member to vote on their behalf. So they'll basically give their real credential to a friend or family member and keep only the fake credentials with them in case for the coercer. Unfortunately, a drawback to this is the voter must trust some kind of third party. And then finally, the third most extreme scenario, which is what if the coercer is waiting outside the booth? So literally at the registrar's office or right outside the registrar's office, the coercer is there ready to strip search the voter of any voting material. So in this case, while the voter is inside the booth, the voter can actually cast or delegate their votes, their voting power, basically, to a political party. So in this way, when a political party says, okay, we'll be casting, a vote for X, then the voters' voting power automatically is assigned to X. In this case. But unfortunately, the voter must trust the kiosk in this regard because the voter has no way to independently verify the process that's going on inside the booth, which, as you saw, the voter device in scenario 1 or scenario 2 would be able to do. All right, so now just about wraps things up in conclusion. So coercion is definitely a big problem for remote e-voting systems, especially given that the voter is in an unsupervised location. And so during voter registration, unfortunately, existing coercion-resistant e-voting systems require the voter to have some type of access to an untappable and incoercible device. And so that's why we present our solution, a coercion-resistant in-person voter registration scheme that basically leverages the in-person component that you have to have when a voter has to authenticate themselves and prove their humanness and their citizenship. So provide the voters with their real and fake credentials without using a trusted device. This still preserves end-to-end verifiability, which we of course want, and the kiosk is untrusted in this respect, except if voters are actively under coercion, which we saw in previous slide was scenario 3. All right, that's about wraps it up. Any questions?
Oh, this was excellent. Thank you so much, Louis. Very, very cool stuff. I think we've got a couple of minutes, more like 25, 30, a little more than that, to actually go into breakout rooms and discuss this. But just one more minute. Oh, there you go, Christopher, and there you go, Adam. Christopher, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I was you mentioned that there was a secret sharing component in the algorithms and such, and I was just trying to puzzle out what was that. What algorithm are you using? Is it a VSS, a Shamir, two-layer Shamir? There's a lot of different choices in that space, and my intuition says there might be something useful there. That's it.
So okay, let me reshare you the slides real quick so I can pull up that thing. So this is actually what existing literature proposes. It looks so existing literature proposes that because to ensure credential integrity, so basically the registrar not being able to cast a vote, then you would split the credential into multiple registrar entities, so that no single registrar has access to the voter's full real credential. Does that make sense? We ourselves do not use secret sharing in itself. So because the kiosk actually has the whole credential, the whole real credential in that respect.
Okay.
So the voter has the ability, the kiosk has the ability to actually cast votes on behalf of the voter, but this is actually detectable. This is actually detectable during the credential activation or anytime later then, if the kiosk acts maliciously in that respect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I call on people then? Yeah, okay, David.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Louis. I was just wondering if you can explain a little bit more about what the interactive proof is proving. Is it like a set membership, or I didn't quite understand what
Sure.
the contents of the proof are?
So, okay, so yeah, so the credential itself is a private key, public key pair, right? So the actual items that go onto a public ledger. So this is a ledger that everyone can see and say, okay, so this is the roster list of voters. But next to the roster list of voters, you're going to have what their associated real credential will be. But in this respect, you don't want to put the public key, because if you put the public key associated with the voter, then the coercer will be like, well, give me the private key associated to that public key, and then that's doomed in that respect. So what you do instead is you actually encrypt the public key using algamol, and the kiosk actually proves to the voter the secret, the algamol secret that it's using to do the encryption, right? Because so you're just proving that you know such secret that turns this public key into this encrypted public key. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it's discrete log proof. John Peterson.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the thing is, it's literally just a discrete log proof that the thing that we encrypted to go on the blockchain is indeed the public key on this credential. It's just for that on fake credentials, that proof is going to be a lie, right?
But still going to be cryptographically valid as well. So if someone wants, so when the coercer gets the fake credential, it will be cryptographically valid, but it's not going to be semantically valid because the commit wasn't printed beforehand. And yeah, the kiosk knew the challenge before the commit. Yes, Peter? Sorry, I think you're muted. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, aren't we shifting with those zero knowledge protocol, aren't we shifting the trust from kiosks to printing authorities?
Good question. So the printing authority just supplies the randomness for each envelope. And even if the printing authority could give the kiosk in that respect all of the randomness that it's generated, because the voter has to pick a certain envelope from this stack of envelopes, the kiosk still does not know which envelope the voter is going to pick. So of course the stack of envelopes needs to be somewhat designed to not have a front and an end where most people are going to choose from front and end. It should be kind of like just a box, and then you can just pick anywhere you want and present it to the kiosk. And the kiosk only has one chance to be right. If it chooses wrongly, because this is on printed material, this is not computational, this printed material. If they get it wrong, because they'll have to change the commit in that respect, because then this will be detectable during credential activation when the voter gets access to a device. Then they can have a cryptographic accountability, an accountability that the kiosk misbehaved. And enough of that, well, even one of that can prove that the kiosk misbehaved, but you can blame it on computational error. But if this keeps repeating, then yeah, you'll be able to detect that. So in that respect, so yeah, so you're also relying on the voter to have some level of randomness in choosing the envelope. It would be the direct answer in that respect.
And so I'm not very informed about zero knowledge proofs, but the circuit is like pre-coded in general for all the printing authorities, so they cannot intervene with that, right?
The zero knowledge proof is discrete logarithm, so there's no circuit.
Oh, okay.
So they wouldn't be able to do anything in that response. It's just the challenge is just a bit string, random bit 32 byte bit string or something along those lines. So it's really nothing much.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, Philip.
Hi. I think I'm going to take pride in asking the dumbest question so far, if only because it's clearly not as intelligent as the last questions. But it was something I missed, and it was the bit about you highlighted the challenge of having a corrupt registrar, but in the final scheme, I couldn't quite work out why the registrar just can't print QR codes willy-nilly and use them all, him or herself. And so how did I miss that?
Oh, so in that respect, let me show the slides. So we have kiosk. Okay, so yeah, so this is the slide. So we're basically in this malicious scenario, you have the registrar giving the voter a fake credential, and then the registrar keeps the real credential, and then they'll cast a vote. So there's two things that there are really two criteria, two steps to ensure. One, the kiosk provides the voter with a real credential, right? So that's the first step. There has to be a procedure that the voter can use to ensure that the kiosk remains honest when supplying the credential. And that's what this interactive zero knowledge proof is about. Now, it doesn't solve the issue that the kiosk still knows what the real credential is, right? So but we ensure that the kiosk gives the real credential to the voter, but we still don't ensure that the kiosk, the kiosk has knowledge of this, which existing literature it doesn't have this issue because it's secret shared among multiple, let's say, kiosks. How this is actually solved is during credential activation. So when now the voter is ensured that this is their real credential, the device will be able to load this real credential. Will be able to load this credential onto the device and check to ensure that no votes were cast using this credential. So if this device has also access to the public ledger, and because it knows what the real credential is, it can make sure that no votes were made using this real credential except by what this device has sent. Because if the voter wanted to, I think I should, thank you for bringing that up. I should have a
I have to take exception to that answer a little bit. That doesn't sound to me like it would work, and that's not my memory of how.
So
Right.
because you would, when you cast a vote, you're signing using your private key in that respect.
But what if the adversary is just kind of keeping that secret credential laying in wait, and hasn't voted with it yet, but once to later, kind of at the worst time for you, right?
But then the in that case, the device will be able to see this so throughout the period, and will be able to notify the voter, hey, someone else has casted a vote using your credential.
But you might learn that quite a bit later, right? Kind of a long time later at the time of the adversary's choosing rather than yours, which would be inconvenient, right? Yes. So we have a solution to this. Why don't you say what the solution is?
Okay, we do have a solution to this, and that's actually yes, we do have where basically the activation process is actually 2 steps instead of 1 step, and that's because of timing. We didn't really get into this, but the credential that the kiosk gives would become, once activated, would actually transfer ownership to a new credential that the voter device produces. So the voter's device will produce a public key private key pair, and will basically transfer voting power from the credential that the kiosk produced over to the new set of credentials that the voter's device has created. And this way you could actually take advantage of trusted hardware, because the device has secure enclave and etc. So you could actually take advantage of those trusted hardware as an additional nice step. But yeah, you're transferring ownership. So then this credential that you receive from the kiosk is basically nothing. It's no longer toxic waste. That's where the toxic waste came in. It's no longer toxic waste. If anyone else tried to activate this credential, or the kiosk tried to use it maliciously, it won't work, because the credential that will actually be able to cast votes with will be the one from the voter's device. Does that make sense?
I'm going to nod as if I've got it 100%, but really it's nearly 80%. I think I'm following.
Sorry. For all of the blockchain people here, think of it as a single-use token, right? Kind of the real credential just does it, gives you a single-use token in something equivalent to a Bitcoin wallet with 1 Satoshi in it, right? And whoever gets to it first can spend it by, and therefore activate the real credential, right? If the adversary spends it first and activates it, then you immediately know that something went fishy, and you go back and complain and do it again. If you get to it first, well, your spend is on the blockchain, and it's yours forever. And the adversary, even if they had the old wallet, they don't have the private key for the new wallet, which is only on your device, because you've spent the token and given it to yourself, right? So if that makes it a little bit more intuitive.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, and another question: what about doing it again? What about the part when you give your state ID, for example, for the authority in the kiosk, and what if I come for the second time?
So if you come a second time, your encrypted real credential will change, because the kiosk will produce you a new real credential. So the encryption of that process, because the randomness will be a new randomness, and you'll have a new credential. The encryption, the ciphertext will be different. So on the public ledger, where your name is located, you're going to have an update, a state update. So you're gonna kind of like what Brian just said. Your old wallet no longer is is in use, now you have this new wallet because you have this new credential in place. You've changed the state of it. So this does notify the coercer in that respect. If the coercer has actually, well, the coercer will have access to the public ledger. So they'll know if the voter redoes voter registration within that respect. There is also a way that you could, if you just want to go to the registrar and just create fake credentials by itself, so not create a new real credential, but just create more fake credentials. You're just like, hey, you don't have to tell the people that you want to. I don't know. In that respect, actually, in that respect, depends. Yeah, you could create more fake credentials.
Yeah, but do they rewrite? Like, do I have a single? As far as I understand, I can only have a single link from my real ID to those list of fake or real IDs. So if I just come to an office again, I rewrite everything. I cannot just attach to the list, right?
So it's not a list. It's a single entry. You have two columns. You have the voter identity, so me, Louis-Henri Merino, and you have the encrypted real credential next to it. That's it. You don't have a list of how many credentials there are, nothing. It's just,
yeah, okay.
This is just the encrypted real credential.
I'm just worried about Sybil. So if I have this linkage, so it doesn't matter. Yeah,
exactly.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Christopher.
Yes, I am. So this is very much around the non-coercion of the registration process that then allows them to use their personal credentials to, on a device or whatever to vote in the future. Or did I miss something else?
You're right. Yes, the
Okay.
registrar is meant to not be in a coercion state, so they wouldn't be able. Right. We're not satisfying the coercion scenario because within respect to the registrar, because the kiosk knows which is the real credential and just reports, this is the real credential to the coercer, and then. Yeah, it's
so
not.
I had some comments about longevity and renewal and all of that kind of stuff, but it sounds like that's out of scope of this particular protocol. But I'd be interested in talking about that at some point.
Yeah,
how do you renew it? And there are I think there's maybe some ways you can do that, and in a non-coercive way. So not so much voting, but renewal of a voting, which was what Peter was kind of implying to me when you go back to the registrar for some reason. So
actually, renewal is really interesting. So yes, if you go back to the registrar again, your encrypted real credential will change with what your voter identifier is, right? So this encrypted will change, so that notifies the coercer. But renewal in terms of so credentials, they are arbitrarily long, right? It's just a credential, they don't expire. Of course, the expiration will be set forth based on the policy set forth by the election authority. So it could be 5 to 10 years, kind of like a passport. So, but you're going to change your devices, right? I mean, no one has their phone for 5 to 10 years, right? And so you can actually repeat the process of how we're revoking the access right of the kiosk by having, the old wallet analogy and the new wallet analogy, and just continuously do that. So you have it, so you have your so this is the kiosk that has access to this wallet, and you've made it so now your phone has access to the wallet and the kiosk has no longer access to it. And you can do it again, and you can do it again and again and again. It's just a transfer of ownership, just changing the state of this. And the actual entry in the public ledger between what is your real encrypted credential, your encrypted real credential, and your voter identifier never changes in that respect.
So this just real quick, you know, part of me is going, I think you're maybe making a mistake by emphasizing the voting side of this thing. Yes, it's a useful atomic element for voting, but I think that it may have some general utility for a variety of in-person registration, verifiable claims, etc. Like, you know, I would say go to the to the verified claims, you know, working group when they restart for version 2, and basically say, you know, here's another registration process. Don't even talk about voting. Just say, you know, how do you prevent coercion and false claims and you know, in that regards. So anyhow, just a minor side. Emphasize that you're on the credential registration side. Maybe de-emphasize the voting, because I still think there's a number of things on the voting side we still have to deal with. I mean, you know, ultimately now you have a device that is registered to vote. Then there's all kinds of nice coercion things like, here, you know, hand me your phone, put in your PIN. Okay, I'm going to vote for you. This doesn't solve that problem. So, which I think, you know, is you know, not solving that. I think when I heard the paper and heard the, you know, the introduction, all that kind of stuff, I thought you were talking more at that end. So emphasize in your titles the registration side. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I think this could definitely flow with coercion resistance identity as well. Like this could be more abstractly made to, because it really credentials are you can think of that as identity credentials instead of e-voting credentials, in that respect. Yeah.
Or do it with 10 kiosks and have a web of trust. Or I'm a kiosk, you're a kiosk, everybody's a kiosk.
Yeah. So if I can just quickly jump in, we have thought a little bit about, like, you know, kind of how this kind of mechanism can be used for other types of applications, including things like, you know, proving a verifiable claim, which would be cool. There's one big kind of issue that jumps in when we're no longer talking about voting, but we're talking about something where, like, an adversary, a potential coercer who might have gotten, say, your real or fake credential and is not yet sure which it is it trivial for the adversary to detect which it is just by the semantics of what they want to do with it, right? So if they've kind of coerced you to sign over, you know, your, like, you know, your, you know, college degree to them so that they can prove to somebody that they have your college degree, or, you know, I don't know. Then
that's assuming those are transferable.
They can just go and immediately try using the credential to prove that and see if the proof works, right? And then they've immediately, you know, kind of seen through your, you know, the coercion resistance, right? Whereas in the voting case, we kind of rely on the fact that, well, if you're voting an election with a lot of votes, it's, you know, and you cast a vote and you see the resulting outcome, presumably it's hard to tell whether your vote was actually cast or not just from the outcome, right? You know, and that's kind of a critical subtlety that applies to that situation. For other situations, you know, something else is needed to replace that makes it non-trivial for the coercer to see whether they succeeded in coercing you, right? So another, you know, kind of related practice that we know is out there is with banks, the idea of a coercion pin, right? A duress pin, I think they call it, right? So you can have a second pin, you know, besides your regular one that you're welcome to use when withdrawing money from the ATM if somebody is forcing you to do it by gunpoint or something like that. And I don't know exactly how those work, but I'm presuming they actually work to get the money out, right? Like they don't immediately notify, you know, they don't immediately block and say no, you know, but maybe, you know, they you know, suddenly set a limit on the withdrawal, and, you know, kind of with some delay freeze the funds or something like that, right? So that's, that's one of the issues. Like, any kind of coercion resistance has to be in some way non-trivial to detect, for the coercer to detect whether they've succeeded or not. And that kind of seems to be application dependent. And I'm not sure how to do that with verifiable claims. So.
Any alignment with the proof of personhood party thing that you've been working on? Because that's the other side of. Yeah, actually, that's one question I was kind of surprised nobody asked about before, because because this is also intended to be something that we see as potentially usable in that context. And your questions about longevity and renewal also dovetail with that, right? So one of the ways I see this working in an in-person proof of personhood party, right? You could actually have basically the registrar being not a government, official government anymore, but just kind of the set of organizers of one or another personhood party, right? With some, hopefully. And like, you go through the line, you gather, you go through the line, you get your, pop token, but that's not the full pop token. That's just your kind of entrance ticket to go into one of the booths nearby that's available. You mint your real or fake credentials, quickly in a couple minutes, and then you go out and you have both real and fake credentials, basically saying that you attended this pop party, right? Now, this has some obviously different properties from the government case. Here we're using, we're using physical presence as the Sybil resistance rather than government ID, right? It would have to be, at least in this example, it would have to be a more regular thing that you do, not once every 5 years, but probably once every few months or whatever. We would decide the right pop frequency is. So it would be a little bit higher, more frequent cost. But I would love to do it at, say, rebooting just as a trial. Yeah, we do those regularly. So
yeah. So a big question is, how quick and easy could it be made? Can that be made a reasonable cost, even if you do need to do it, more frequently? But then also that kind of simplifies things in that it each new round is kind of a totally separate, kind of set of identities or personhood, pop tokens that doesn't really need a correlation. You kind of start the ledger from scratch each pop party. You don't get to update it, but you don't have to wait that long. If something goes wrong and you need a new set of tokens or something, you don't have to wait that long before you can recover, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry to be a little bit long-winded. Peter, you had your hand up for a while, I know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that question was answered already, but I want to understand. Do we have now a way to a privacy preserving proof of person having a state ID? So can we privately transfer our state ID to blockchain, for example, not disclosing it?
Think so with the work that Ari Jules has done with Candid, with like the social security number he did it with, where you I forgot what the tool is it's called, but you literally go to like irs.gov and you give this to, I think through Chainlink or through the blockchain, the web page, and they scrape out the social security number on this web page. And then they do some encryption and some stuff, and this will be tied to you as an identity. So I'm pretty sure the passports have some level of unique identifier in them, although maybe not, because from what I've seen, passports numbers change all the time every time you get a new passport. But maybe you could select certain fields like name, birthday, place of birth, and stuff like that, and use that as the unique fingerprint for each person, something along those lines. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah. So if if we're just trying to build, privacy preserving identities on top of classic government IDs, right? That's what Candid, kind of achieves basically by, finding a way to scrape your social security number or whatever and code it in, say, a verifiable claim, and then you can use that, basically use an anonymized version of that, or pseudonymized version of that to prove uniqueness, say among social security numbers or something, right?
Oh, can I mean, sort of related to the QR thing, some things that may help in some of this stuff. So there's some, you have some, you're presenting QRs because of the imprecision of people being able to enter in numbers and things of that nature. We use this, this is output from our seed tool. This is a live print which works black and white color, and that in combination with the partial hash, that if these two match, you've got the same thing. Obviously the QR itself, but we've also have sort of well, the byte words basically is a special format that are designed for all speakers of all languages. It's in the sense that it's, you don't have to be a native English speaker and you can speak it out loud easily, but also the first and last letter are all significant. There's no duplicates in the first and last letter. It's actually really easy to convert this to this and back very quickly. And then we also have, this is something called a crypto request, which will basically ask you to confirm that. So, so there are some interesting things. And then this happens to be on waterproof paper. That means that it has some longevity in the sense that I can put it in a drawer or whatever. There can be a fire that doesn't burn the drawer, but when the firemen come in and wet the whole place down, doesn't destroy the paper. It's intended for hikers and stuff, and it's not that much more expensive than good paper. So if anybody wants to talk about various QR code scenarios and things of that nature, let me know, because I think there's more you can do. For instance, I think with this type of a technique, you may be able to do some kind of challenge off with the user to speak some words or something. There may be a trick, a pin, would be, the first two words are anyway, you get the idea. And these are, by the way, chosen from some large libraries of words that are memorable because they have either high evocative content or high concreteness, which are the two things that make words most easily memorable. So thanks for the interruption.
That sounds really cool. The QR code, your paper, very cool.
Well, perfect. I think that's about it. Anybody else has any last minute questions?
I have a quick question, which is whether you have thought about any kind of extensions of this mechanism to deal with stolen phones.
Or to revocation in general, Paula, is that your?
Yeah.
Louis-Henri, that's for Louis-Henri, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, could you repeat?
Oh, I meant, I'm kind of getting back to what Christopher was talking about before. that kind of this doesn't address the question of whether someone has their phone stolen. So I wonder if you thought about this scenario and have any kind of early intuitions about it or thoughts.
Yeah. So if someone loses their phone, then they wouldn't have had the ability to transfer the ownership of their credentials to a new phone. So they would have to go back in person to the registrar's office and get a new set of real and fake credentials in that respect. Or they could just get a real credential, of course, if they're not under coercion. If as mentioned before, if they don't have the ability to have a trusted device to even begin with, you are capable of delegating your voting power over to a political party. So whatever they vote for, which will likely be in plain text format. So they'll send a proof along with what they voted for. So that you can see, if you ever want to go back to the registrar and change which political party you want to delegate your voting power to, you could do that. And actually, it kind of brought to my attention as well that something I've been thinking with voting is if we do the delegations possibility on the kiosk side, I think maybe people would want to just delegate their votes, not because they're under coercion, but because it's just simpler. And I think that could actually pose problems in itself. It's just something to keep in mind. You kind of see this with liquid democracy too, where you can have centralization of power because of this delegation. So that is something also to pay attention to. Just because we have delegation, there are some drawbacks in that respect.
I just had another question about where you are in the process with this project. If you're publishing, just if you have a sense about timeline or things like that.
So we're actually we've actually conducted a first stage usability study, let's say, and we're conducting one shortly, second stage to test this on real people. And as soon as that is completed, should be within the next few months, we'll resubmit the paper, and and see how it goes. But we'll probably release a archive preprint shortly on this so that we can share that with all of you.
Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Well, this was excellent. Thank you so much for this incredible presentation, and thank you everybody for participating in it. Yeah, that's about it. I'll give it back everybody a couple of minutes from this meeting, and we'll definitely let you guys know when is the next one. Probably around the same, a couple of months from now. 2 is what we're shooting for, and we'll see what we can get there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Great to see you again.
Thank you, George.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
for having me.
Thank you.